Day one, and there is lots bubbling ahead of one of the most hectic exchange windows I think we will see for some time. And a lot of it at the moment centres around Port Adelaide, doesn't it? Dunkley, they were interested in. Jack Graham, that one didn't end well. And now Jason Horne-Francis, who's requested a trade to them. The Power have also met with Asava Radaglia. But what gets this deal done? So the two clubs have been in negotiation since Jason Horne-Francis met with Port Adelaide last week, as detailed by Kane Corn. So 2 first-round picks, this year's pick 8 and a future first rounder for next year. Now, if I'm North Melbourne, I'm asking for more than that. I'm asking for a player to be involved as well. Clearly, Port Adelaide will want the deal to be done quickly before North Melbourne can really work the phones and find out who might want to come back to Melbourne, who might want to come home. There's a player, Miles Bergman, who's been mentioned as well, who was a high pick, who just hasn't had a good run of it at Port Adelaide, whether he might be asked to be involved in a trade. So much to play out here, of course, but Zach Butters, I think North Melbourne will ask for, is what's doing the rounds at the moment. Now, Port Adelaide, of course, wouldn't sanction that move, but this is just where the negotiations sit at the moment. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens here with this particular trade involving Jason Horne-Francis, who really, it's been bubbling away for a lot of the year, hasn't it? Frustration building ever since pretty much he put off those contract talks earlier on this season. Frustration from player to club and club to player, I think it's fair to say. Verbal clashes with teammates. His competitiveness bubbled over at times. He failed to live up to training standards at other times. He was cautioned by club chiefs after flying home to Adelaide without the club's knowledge. All of those things. Dropped in August for refusing to complete a full ice bath recovery. He liked that fake trade Instagram account, of course, that ironically had Zach Butters involved. He was told that he had to remove that like as well. So Horne-Francis will probably turn around and say, well, the instability at North Melbourne, the coach, the CEO, the football department upheaval, the review that's ongoing, and that's fair enough as well. So there's an element of cutting one's losses here, isn't there, from the club and also the player. So the Power are very excited about it. They've been in talks with him for some time now. So how does this deal play out? I think we might have Junior Rioli involved in this as a possibility as well. Pick 2 could be involved. Mitch Georgiades could be involved as well. So that Carl Amon compensation pick, which now sits at 27 for Port Adelaide, is that going to be enough to satisfy West Coast for Junior Rioli? And now Mitch Georgiades at the moment has given no indication that he's willing to be traded with a year to run on his contract, and Port haven't asked him. They would like to keep him. But there's an ongoing murmur that West Coast will make a play for Mitch Georgiades. So what if it turned out to be Rioli and pick 2 for Georgiades and 27 if you're West Coast? And then pick 2 gets traded from Port Adelaide to North Melbourne. So these are all the things that are being thrashed around at the moment. As I say, North will ask for Zach Butters. They won't get him. They might ask for Miles Bergman. Would he be involved with the 2 first-rounders? So lots happening at Port Adelaide at the moment. And just before we leave it, the Jack Graham situation, isn't it funny how these meetings with the likes of Jason Horne-Francis happen in secret? But the Jack Graham one is so public. Cameras at the airport, walked across the field, cameras there. He goes through the process. Everything goes well. It's going to be a second-round pick. The player's happy enough to come. He's not desperate to leave, but there's a verbal agreement in place. And then we go cold. And we go cold because the Jack Graham camp grows suspicious. They back out. The big courage for a player to put his neck out like that, because it becomes clear that Jason Horne-Francis has nominated Port Adelaide and put in an official trade request. That's how things work at this time of the year. St Kilda's a club we haven't heard a lot about. You know, a bit of a murmur about players leaving, but who's coming in to that football club? Hard to get a read on. Very quiet, Ray, and not through lack of trying. I mean, Lloyd Meek was another one. They were initially in for Jack Bowes, and then they weren't, which, of course, raised the ire of club legend Nick Riewoldt. So there's a few things around the periphery. Obviously, we know the players who have been linked to a move out of the club, but very hard to get a read at the moment on players who might be coming in, unfortunately, Ray. I'm sorry, mate. Hopefully the picture becomes clearer as the days go on if you are a Saints fan. AG's text in. Tarryn Thomas, you mentioned this morning. I did. What are the likelihood and who may be the clubs chasing him? Well, AG, the Gold Coast Suns actually met with Tarryn Thomas's management earlier on this year, and they were a fair way down the path of perhaps exploring a move for Tarryn Thomas from North Melbourne to the Suns. Now, that was aborted. But this is just bubbling away a bit at the moment. Now, Tarryn Thomas has been in at North Melbourne. He's been training. He's been catching up with people during the break. I wouldn't rule it out completely just yet. if we're watching the Tarryn Thomas situation. Now, I'm told there's still a possibility he could put in a trade request. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen if you're North Melbourne, because at the moment they completely can't take a trick. Off the text, I've heard that possibly Xavier Dersma might go to North with a pick. Well, that's another one to watch, because Xavier Dersma had an unsettled year with injury and poor form, and he was a player that was largely unhappy this year. Now, check this out a few times. It was always completely extinguished and squashed that he would put in the trade request. So that would be something of a surprise, but given the year that he's had, again, probably can't rule it out when these negotiations get down to the nitty-gritty about who will be involved to get Jason Horne-Francis over the line at Port Adelaide. It's a massive story, isn't it? Fremantle will today, they'll put 2 first-round draft picks on the table for Luke Jackson, so this one's ongoing. The deal is worth closer to $700,000 a season than $900,000 frequently reported. Clearly, it's a long-term deal, though. So the Dockers will put forward pick 13 this year, and they'll also table next year's first-rounder for Jackson. No doubt Melbourne will want more. The Dockers are pushing for a second-round pick back the other way. Now I'm hearing Melbourne are after a second-round pick on top of the 2 first-rounders coming in. So there's a lot of work to play out here, not just in regards to the 2 first-rounders, but what else makes up that deal as part of the exchange. The loose change in the exchange, if you like. So that one is certainly got a lot of water to go under the bridge. And when you look back at the history of the 2 first-round draft picks, there's almost always another pick coming back the other way. You know, Dylan Shield, it was the second-rounder coming back. Dane Beams, it was 2/3. Jake Lever is the example the Demons wouldn't like at the moment. The D's gave a current and a future first-rounder for Jake Lever to Adelaide to get him out of there, like Fremantle will do for Jackson. And the D's got a second-round pick back while swapping their future 4th for Adelaide's future 3rd. Lever, a similar age. He was in the All-Australian squad of 40 at the time. So that's the example. That's what Fremantle are sort of bargaining with at the moment.